Right then, so we're going to think about the microscopically small. Microscopic, that's a funny word. Where does that come from? Well, it means that very small, essentially. And it comes from Latin, two Latin sources, actually. Micro meaning very small, and scope, scopus in Latin, is connected with seeing or watching, observing. So there's a modern microscope, fairly modern, microscope. So you might say microscopically small. Microscopically small is so small you need a microscope to see it. If you don't have a microscope, you can't see it. It's invisible. Now, some living things are small. Some living things are very small. These are bacteria, and they're very small. You can't really see them without a microscope. Some living things are so small that we cannot see them. Some living things are so small that we cannot see them without special equipment. So some living things are so small that we cannot see them without special equipment. And the special equipment in this case is a microscope. You need a microscope to see very, very small things. Now, scientists and students use microscopes. Scientists and students use microscopes to look at very small things. If you need a microscope to see something, we call it microscopically small. So if you need a microscope to see something, we call it microscopically small. Now I'm going to think about medical science. These guys are researchers, medical researchers. Medical science. Understanding microscopic living things is very important to medical science. So medical researchers are investigating coronavirus. Those are microscopic living things. Some people say not, but very small things. Understanding these very small things is very important to medical science. Now, who invented the microscope? Do you know? Who invented the microscope? Inventor. Who is the inventor of the microscope? Well, this is the inventor of the microscope. As you can see, this guy lived quite a long time ago, 300 years, more than 300 years ago. And he is the inventor of the microscope. Who's he? Now, the inventor of the microscope was not a doctor. He wasn't a doctor, so who was he? And the inventor of the microscope was not a scientist. So he wasn't a doctor, he wasn't a scientist. Who was he? His name was Antonie van Leeuwenhoek. And Antonie van Leeuwenhoek was born in 1632 near Amsterdam. Amsterdam in the Netherlands, in Holland. There's Amsterdam today, I suppose. It's in the Netherlands. We sometimes call it Holland. Amsterdam. So Van Leeuwenhoek was born near Amsterdam. In 1632, which is almost 400 years ago. Close enough. Now, who was he? He wasn't a scientist, he wasn't a researcher, he wasn't a doctor. He was kind of an ordinary person. His father made baskets. So his father was a basket maker. So Antonie van Leeuwenhoek's father made baskets. And he died when Antonie was 5 years old. So his father died when Antonie was 5 years old. And his mother's family made beer. So he's kind of an ordinary person. He wasn't a scientist, wasn't a doctor, nothing like that. He wasn't involved in research, just kind of an ordinary person. His mother remarried when Van Leeuwenhoek's father died. So she married again. In fact, she married a painter. But the painter also died quite soon, maybe 5 years later. So when Van Leeuwenhoek was about 10, the father also died. The new father. So, because he came from a very ordinary background, he had no scientific background, and he wasn't well educated. He didn't go to school for very long, didn't go to any really famous universities or anything like that. He really wasn't very well educated. He left school quite early and started work. So when he was 16, he started work in a clothes shop. So he's working in a clothes shop. He wasn't, he wasn't any special. Wasn't medical related or to do with the research, nothing like that. Just an ordinary job in a clothes shop, kind of designing, making clothes and selling clothes. So he was an ordinary person. There's a clothes shop. We can also call it a draper's shop. Drapery is clothes. Drapes. We call clothes drapes sometimes. So Antonie van Leeuwenhoek was working in a clothes shop. Nothing special, no medical related job, nothing like that. Just an ordinary job in a clothes shop. So he had no connection with science or medicine. But he did use one of these. Right? So you could say maybe a little bit of a connection with science. He used a magnifying glass. He used a magnifying glass. You can imagine he was looking at the clothes, looking at the threads in the clothes. So he looked at thread like this, I guess, with a magnifying glass. He'd look at the thread to see if the quality was good or bad. So he was looking at delicate threads, thin, delicate threads. He looked at thin, delicate thread with a magnifying glass. And you could say that a magnifying glass magnifies, makes it look bigger, makes things look bigger. So a magnifying glass magnifies. Magnifying, magnifies. A magnifying glass magnifies things. And a magnifying glass magnifies about 2 times. The ones we use today, probably about 2 times. Not so much. So it hasn't changed very much. The magnifying glasses we use today to help us read, perhaps, they don't magnify so much. Hasn't really changed since 400 years ago. Things appear about 2 times bigger. They magnify by 2 times. Things appear about 2 times bigger. Things appear about twice as big. Now, Antonie van Leeuwenhoek, he was very serious. He was very serious about his job. His ordinary job, just working in a clothes shop, but he was really serious. And he was very serious about checking quality, the quality of the thread, the quality of the clothes. So he wanted things to be better. It wasn't medical related or research science, nothing like that. He just was serious about his job and he wanted to produce the best quality. So he was very serious about checking the quality of cloth, the quality of clothes. And he wasn't satisfied. He wasn't happy. He wasn't satisfied. He wasn't satisfied at all. He wasn't satisfied at all with the magnifying glasses that he was using. So maybe magnifying 2 times, making things 2 times as big, twice as big. He wasn't satisfied with that at all. He wanted a better magnifying glass. To look at his threads. So, to make a better magnifying glass, first of all, he taught himself glass making. So you can see he was very serious, and he thought he needed a different skill, glass making, so he taught himself how to do it. He was clever. And he developed a special technique for making glass. So he taught himself this new skill, and then he developed a special technique. So that's pretty clever. He developed a special technique. He developed a special technique for making small, very high quality balls of glass. He developed a special technique for making small, very high quality balls of glass. So here's a ball of glass, a glass ball. And with these tiny, extremely high quality balls of glass, he could magnify things about 270 times. 270 times. Remember, the magnifying glasses are about 2 times, twice as big. Now it's 270 times. And that's a big, big improvement. That's really changed it. So he's made these little tiny balls of glass and he's used this technique, and now he can see things 270 times bigger than real life. 270. That's a lot. So he could magnify things 270 times. Not 2 times, 270 times. And his magnifying glass didn't really look like this. It was a different design. We'll get to that later. But 270 times. Really, really big improvement. It was a huge technical advance. Huge technical improvement, I suppose you could say. 270 times. That's incredible. And now with his magnifying glass, he started looking at other things. First of all, he's looking at thread. He's going, wow, 270 times bigger. And now he's looking at other things, not just thread, but other things. What kind of other things? For example, he took an interest in bacteria. These are bacteria here. And he also took an interest in blood cells, the cells in your blood flowing through your body. He was able to see how blood flows in the body. He could see how blood flows in the body, blood flow. He could observe how blood flows in the body. He could see, he could observe. So, nobody had ever done this, the first time ever, right? Nobody'd be able to see blood flowing in the body. That's, impossible. 270 times bigger, yes, now he can see it. Imagine that. So he observed the patterns of tiny muscle fiber in the bodies of human beings. Muscle fiber. So imagine nobody ever did this before. Bacteria, blood cells, muscle fiber. First time ever. You've gone from 2 times to 270 times. Incredible. So now he can observe the patterns of tiny muscle fiber in human beings, for example. It's incredible. Now, of course, previously, before, these things, for example, bacteria, blood cells, muscle fiber, previously, these things were completely invisible. Couldn't see it, of course. So, Van Leeuwenhoek had a difficult decision to make. It's a very difficult decision. Can you think what that is? Why did he have a difficult decision to make? Think about it. He had a difficult decision to make. He's made this incredible invention. He's gone from 2 times to 270 times. You can see all these completely invisible things. So he had a difficult decision. Can you think what that is? Think about it. What was the difficult decision? Now, he could see things which were invisible. This is his microscope, actually. It's got a glass ball on the end of that thing, and he's putting things under it, and you can see things. So he could see things which were invisible. So what's his difficult decision? Now, as a worker in the apparel business, as a clothes maker, clothes salesman, right? As a worker in the apparel business, he thought it would be better to keep his invention secret. In other words, don't tell anybody about it, right? He suddenly made this incredible technical advance, 270 times bigger than real life. Incredible difference. But he's thinking, well, as an apparel person working in the apparel business, maybe it's better to keep the invention secret. Can you see why? Think about it. Maybe he should hide his invention. Don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody. Because if he kept his invention secret, right? If he kept his invention secret, only he would be able to see in such detail. So here's a needle with thread. He's working in the clothes business. If he keeps it secret, he's the only one who can see this. Nobody else can see it. No other apparel business workers can see this. So he's thinking, maybe it's better if I keep this invention secret. Then only I can see it. Maybe that's a good idea. Can you see why? Only he would be able to investigate the quality of clothes in such detail. Only he will be able to see the really delicate, fine detail of thread. And that would be a big professional advantage. It'd be give him profit. He can make the best clothes, the most delicate, finest clothes. And only he will be able to do that. So maybe it's a good idea to keep the invention secret. So as a draper, as a clothes maker, he's thinking, I'll keep it secret. I won't tell anybody. However, he also knew that his invention had great scientific importance. Great scientific importance. It's a very important breakthrough for science. So he wrote to the Royal Society. So he wrote to the Royal Society. The Royal Family, that would be strange. He wrote to the Royal Society, right? The Royal Society is not kings and queens, it's a bunch of scientists, right? So he wrote to the Royal Society. And the Royal Society was in London, and this was a group of the greatest scientists of the time, all the famous scientists. Remember, this is 17th century. Science is becoming very, very important, very big. And in the Royal Society, this is where all the really important scientists of the time get together and discuss things. They, lecture to each other, tell each other about their inventions, about their discoveries. The Royal Society in London. I think it's the oldest society in the world still. And just as it is today, because it still exists, this was a group of important scientists who wanted to improve knowledge. It's a group of important scientists who wanted to improve knowledge. Now, Van Leeuwenhoek wrote to them, telling them about his invention and what he'd seen bacteria, blood cells, muscle fiber, things like that, things which were invisible. And at first, they didn't believe him. They just didn't believe him. They said, what? No, that didn't happen. That's rubbish. Right? So they didn't believe it. At first, they found it difficult to believe Van Leeuwenhoek. They didn't believe him. They found it difficult to believe. Difficult to believe. It's difficult to believe. They found it difficult to believe that this invisible world was real. Wow, that's real? No. Rubbish. But in 1676, the Royal Society investigated Van Leeuwenhoek. So they sent some people down to Amsterdam, near Amsterdam, to see Van Leeuwenhoek and check him out. Is this guy real? So 1676, they investigated him. And some people said he was crazy. He's crazy. Some of these scientists, no, that's not real. This guy's crazy. And some people said he was a fake. Oh, it's a hoax. It's not real. He's just pretending, making it up. Maybe he wants to make money or something. It's not real. He's either crazy or he's faking. So they didn't believe him. However, in 1677, a year later, the Society confirmed that his claims were completely true. So they investigated him very carefully, and they decided, yes, this is real. They must have been really surprised, incredibly shocked, because all of these famous scientists, they couldn't see these things. And by 1723, when Van Leeuwenhoek died, they had published 190 of his papers. Okay, so 190 of his papers, actually they were letters. He would just write letters to the Society and say, look, I did this experiment, and this is what I saw. So by 1723, when he died, they had published 190 of his papers, details of his experiments. So Van Leeuwenhoek would just write a letter and they published it. So he was really now a very, very important scientist. He was the most important scientist of the time, even though he wasn't really a scientist. He was a clothes maker, clothes salesman. He's kind of an ordinary person. So it's pretty amazing. And you just write a letter, say, okay, I've done this experiment, write a letter, and they publish it, put it in the journal, the most important scientific journal in the world. Imagine that. It's incredible. However, although Van Leeuwenhoek freely published the results of his experiments, okay, so he published the results of his experiments. That was okay. He said, yeah, I did this, and this is what I saw. So he was happy to publish the results of his experiments in this very famous journal. He kept his design secret. Okay? So he didn't mind he published the results of his experiments, but the design of his microscope, he kept it secret. He didn't tell people about that. It was a secret. So he was the leading maker of microscopic lenses for a long time. Microscopic lenses, right? So he was the leading maker. Other people didn't know how to make these tiny glass balls. Remember, he taught himself glass making to do it, and he was the only one who could do it. And he remained the leading maker of microscopic lenses for a long time. How long? His design, apparently, was not fully understood for 300 years, the 1950s. Right? So even in the 1950s, there were things about van Leeuwenhoek's design that wasn't really understood. It's amazing, really. But anyway, Antonie van Leeuwenhoek became very famous. He went from being an ordinary person from a fairly poor background, working in the clothes business, to being the greatest scientist in the world, the most important scientist in the world. He was incredibly famous all of a sudden. He was visited by scientists. Scientists now would go there and say, "Oh, van Leeuwenhoek, what a fantastic invention." Such an important experiment. So he was visited by scientists. He was visited by celebrities. You can imagine. He was actually visited by kings and queens. Now, he was visited by the royal family. Right? He was visited by kings and queens, celebrities, scientists, doctors, all kinds of famous people. But he was very careful. He was very careful that even the celebrities, kings and queens, scientists, all these people, he was very careful. He never showed them his most advanced design. So he might show them an old design, but he didn't show them the newest design. He'd answer their questions, he'd talk about his experiments, he'd show them all this interesting stuff, he'd show them things under the microscope, but he didn't show them his most advanced design. He didn't show them the best microscope. He kept that secret.